Charli Wall, welcome to Unbroken.
Thank you, Alexandra. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to meet you and to have you on the show. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you came across the three principles?
Well, it's quite a lengthy story, so I'll try and keep it brief so it doesn't become a very boring monologue. But my father had just died in 2016, and I'd been looking after him for some 20 odd years by that point.
Wow.
And so it was a pretty significant loss. And what I decided to do was I had my own business. I was running a very successful fitness business in Cambridge where I'd been looking after him. My son was 16 at the time. And I just got really stuck in this grief that I was in, because it wasn't just about my dad. My brother and he had been in the same accident in 1993, and that had killed my brother. And then I'd subsequently looked after my father. So when he died, it was like a big explosion for me in my life. So I decided to sell everything, my house and my business. And at that point, I was looking to become a life coach. I'd been doing a nutritional therapist qualification alongside running a business. But I just thought, no, I have got so many skills. I wanted to put them all under one umbrella as a life coach. So I was looking for courses, and I came across a course called Clarity Coaching. And I was sort of being interviewed by lots of different coaching companies. And I thought, I spoke to the person that was doing Clarity Coaching, had no idea about the principles at all. And I spoke to this person and I thought, right, if I see a squirrel, I'm going to take that one. Like, this is how my mind was kind of working at that point. And so I walked into town, but like not via any parks or anything. And I walked into the shopping centre in Cambridge, and there was this massive squirrel, like a cardboard one. I was like, oh, right, okay, I'll do that course then. And it just so happened to be a three principles coach training course. And I literally I was so anxious back then that when I started it in September 2017, I couldn't even have my video on Zoom. I was just sort of on Zoom, but like a little black square. And they were all so happy. And I was like, what is this? And I couldn't understand what they were talking about. And anyway, that was kind of my initial, how I got into the principles. And then I started working with Jamie Smart one-to-one, and then I was a mentor in the second year of Clarity Coach training. And then I had some significant life-changing insights, which then kind of propelled my journey into uncovering our innate wellness and seeing it like really, truly deeply for myself. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more detail in there. I have a million questions. One of the things you say on your website is that when you sold everything, you went traveling for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm just curious about what that looked like.
Well, it didn't look like traveling like people do, when they go all over the place. I went to India for 5 weeks to study to become a yoga teacher. So I sold my house, sold my business, and then I was on a flight on the next day to India, still with chronic PTSD. So back then, at that point, I was still suffering with very, very bad PTSD, chronic anxiety. And so if you've got chronic anxiety and PTSD, don't go to India. It's like the worst place you could go to, like noisy and full of people. And anyway, so I went to India for 5 weeks, and then I came back, and I then went to Corfu for 3 weeks because my son was over there. So I was kind of exploring Corfu for a bit. And then I went to a place in Spain, in Facinas, in Andalusia, and I was rewilding for a week. And I was with a guide. I run my retreats with him now, actually, in Spain, but I went there and we were rewilding, and he was teaching me about the land and the animals. And it was like a silent but utterly beautiful, profound experience for me in my life at that point. Again, I'm still sort of chronically anxious, but there was something that sort of stripped everything back about that week. And then I went to Crete for 3 weeks. Now, that's not really traveling for me because I have a villa over there, but I did explore different parts of Crete. But I was just on my own. I was just on my own for, apart from being in India, I was just literally on my own. So it wasn't really traveling, but it was more like I needed a rest. I needed a deep rest from the trauma of the past, kind of from the age of 21 to 44. It was very traumatic. There was a lot going on. I was running a business, looking after my son, looking after my dad. And I just needed some time, but I didn't really know that that's what I wanted. So it was after that I joined the Clarity Coach training. So traveling sounds very, exotic and like I'm moving about. I didn't really move about. I stayed still, but apart from the yoga, which obviously I didn't stay still at all, but Corfu, Spain and Crete, I did. I was still and I was on my own, and I just couldn't at that point really even think about talking to anyone. It was quite extraordinary. And then I came back and just happened to land in a place in England called Norfolk. An ex-client said she had a house that I could rent, which was like another kind of weird synchronicity. And I isolated myself in Norfolk for a good few months before I started to come out of this dark night of the soul. So yeah, I don't know if I call it traveling, and maybe I need to change that on my website, but I think it was just, I couldn't be at home and I didn't have a home anymore, and I didn't know where to go or what to do.
Yeah. Wow. And so you mentioned both anxiety and PTSD there. So when did you begin to see those things as something different than you had seen them previously?
So I started the training in 2017 September, and it wasn't until February of 2019 that I had my first insight around anxiety. I was walking my dog, and I'd been, as I said, I'd been working one-to-one with Jamie, and I'd been doing the coach training, and it all seemed, and I was really like studying it, like making notes and studying it and trying to understand it. And all of a sudden, I was walking along, and I just got this new thought. It's very difficult to articulate, isn't it, when you have an insight to someone else? But I literally got this new thought, and then the new thought said, oh, you've been doing all of those things because you didn't know you were safe. And what I mean by all those things for me was like, I used to have to cut all the labels out of clothes. I used to have to feed my son at the same time every day, drink out of the same cup, have the same cutlery. I mean, that's just a very, very small example. I picked my face, my hair was falling out, I bit my nails, I was doing all sorts of kind of compensatory behaviors. So that was the thought. It was like, oh, you've been doing all these things because you didn't know you were safe. And in that moment, I suddenly saw all along I'd been okay, all along I'd been safe. And actually those behaviors and thoughts that I believed were actually making the anxiety worse, because if I didn't have my cup, I was like, oh, if I didn't have my 1 p.m. sleep, I was, so it was very interesting. And then literally about a month later, I was driving to see a friend, and a motorbike passed me. Now for all of those years, from my being 21 to that point, every time I saw a motorbike, I'd gone into this flashback. And the flashback was around all of the stuff around my, the night of the accident, and then subsequent kind of events that happened afterwards. So every time I drove a car and I saw a bike, this would happen. So you can imagine how actually dangerous that is, because you understand thought, right? You're literally in a movie, aren't you?
Mhm.
So this motorbike went past and this automatic response started. And I suddenly, again, this new thought popped in. It was like, you don't have to follow that thought. And that was that.
Mhm.
It literally changed it. And then there was another experience. If you don't mind me telling this story, do you mind me telling this story?
Not at all. Please do.
My son was still living here and he just got his first car, right? So now we're in 2020's lockdown time. And he'd got his first car, he was 17. No, sorry, he was 20, but he'd got his first car. And he went out for the first time in his car. And I started to think, oh my God, he's going to have a crash. He's going to, what if he doesn't get back in time? And I started to clock watch and I started to feel this anxiety. And then just before the time he was due home, I felt myself go into this movie, right? And then he walked through the door and I was able to snap out of it. And then I realized again, flashbacks the same as a flash forward. That's all the same. It's a movie. It's thought that we get caught up in, that we then experience in our body as real. And again, there's been so many kind of insights, but the PTSD and the anxiety were the two. They had the biggest impact on my experience of life, for sure.
Mhm. Wow. And I sense that from what you've described, like taking yoga teacher training and being interested in life coaching before you knew about the principles, that you've always been interested in wellness, health and wellness and those sorts of things. Is that true?
It is true, but I'll caveat that by saying I didn't always. What did it like? I now walk the walk and talk the talk, but I used to talk the talk and not walk the walk. So
Okay.
I was an addiction specialist after the accident. Prior to that, I was doing teacher training and as in children, and then all that happened, and I went into psychiatric nursing. And then I specialised and became an addiction specialist, and then I got into fitness and started a fitness business that then exploded. But all the while, I was drinking, smoking. I had a very bad relationship with food. I was binge eating. I was starving. I was over-exercising, sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day, and still running this business, which was growing and growing and growing. So yes, I had a really strong interest in being different. Like I wanted to be different. Prior to that, as an addiction specialist, my name's Charlotte. My real name's Charlotte. And I was like, right, I'm going to be different. I'm going to do this fitness training and I'm going to I at that point, I had a breakdown, but it doesn't really matter because I was just thinking I was broken. So if I change my name, I'm going to be okay. So then I created this sort of double personality where I was this successful business owner, well known in my town, fitness business owner, teaching fitness to hundreds of women every day. And behind the scenes, Charlotte, and that was Charlie, and Charlotte behind the scenes was not taking care of herself in any way, shape, or form. So there's this really interesting sort of dichotomy in my life. As an addiction specialist, I was drinking heavily. So there was this sort of, I was a workaholic. The accident changed me. My brother's death changed me. And the way that I compensated for my grief was to overwork, drink heavily, smoke, be a drama queen, but be very successful. So, like behind the scene, like in front house, I was you wouldn't have known there was anything wrong with me. And it's only now when I talk about it, because I'm 51, you can see it on my face that that I've smoked, that I haven't taken care of myself. So it was really interesting to, the principles kind of opened it up for me anyway, to be able to understand the depths of my wisdom. It was all wisdom that I just didn't think I could cope unless I had these things in place, but they were keeping me in a state of anxiety. But anyway, now I'm very, very honest about all of it. I don't have anything to hide anymore. Charlotte is Charlie. We're the same. It's brought me here to this point in my life. And I feel very blessed that I'm not dead, basically, because there could have been many times where I would have, I've put myself in very risky situations over the years. And I feel like, everyone has a bit of a nightmare, don't they, when they get to 50? And I was like, I made it. I made it. So yes, I've lived a lot of lives in my 51 years. So to speak to your original question, yes, I've always had a real interest in it. I've studied it, I've learned it, I'm qualified in so many things I can't even mention because that was another addiction. But now I really do live by that, and my body is thankful for it. Because I'm post-menopause now, so I'm like, a lot of women I meet now are my age or older and are postmenopausal and are really, really struggling because stress has a huge impact on your body. Now I feel again so blessed because I haven't taken care of my body and didn't for many years, and I think that the impact of no stress or very little stress in my life has had a profound effect on my body. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'd like to go a little deeper then into those unwanted habits that you had, if you'll indulge me.
You got all day.
So we talk about unwanted habits a lot on this show, and in my work, that's what I tend to focus on. So this is kind of a vague question, but what can you see now about over drinking, overeating, maybe over smoking, that you couldn't see at the time?
That it was a solution.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
it was quietening me down in some way that served me. Smoking, for sure, you're breathing in and then you have a longer exhale, so there's a calming of the parasympathetic nervous system. The drinking, I was always drinking because I couldn't handle my grief. I couldn't handle the trauma of what I was having to deal with my dad for so many years. So the drinking, I was drinking to black out often, and so I slept, so there's even wisdom in that, because it was a solution to a lot of heavy grief and trauma that I didn't know I had. I didn't know how to process. I didn't even know I was anxious. All I knew is that I'd been diagnosed with PTSD. No one said these symptoms were anxiety. I even see the suicidal ideation, which I suffered a lot with, as a solution. It was just a solution that my brain was coming up with. And of course, over the years, you build up this kind of neurological patterning, which is then the thought comes in, oh, I'm going to do it. I don't even think about it. And then you go into the judgment. So then you're in this sort of familiar, repetitive cycle of self-loathing and doing the behavior and self-loathing, and not understanding neuroscience, not understanding thought, not understanding the nervous system and trauma and the shutdown and freeze state that I was sort of perpetually in. So I just see that it was a solution to things I didn't understand very well. And my main habit was probably being horrible to myself.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, and to the dawning realization that these things are solutions, that we're doing the very best we can in the moment with the thinking that we have, and that there really is no such thing as self-sabotage, is what I want to say too. We're always trying to help ourselves. Yeah, yeah, that's such an
Yeah, no, I
important
say
point.
exactly the same thing. It's not self-sabotage, it's a solution. And if you can
Mhm.
turn it around and see the gifts in it, and that your body is taking care of you, and these things are rooted in strength, not weakness. Because the hardest thing for people is that they beat themselves up and they feel shame, and shame is, it becomes secretive and it becomes like a knife in your heart. So then
Mhm.
you're going to do it anyway. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was always something that was protecting me from my own pain, but it always comes out in the end.
Right, right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Um, and is there anything else that you see about what we would call addictions, now that you didn't see in the past?
I think because I've studied and worked in addictions for be 30 years now. I never sort of bought into the whole you're born with it. I never bought into it's a disease. So I'm not sure. I think the only thing I do see differently is that people are stuck in freeze response and will do what they can to get out of it. So there's wisdom in it, and that it's been a solution to um, years of either trauma or just grief or pain in some form, but which is of course individual and subjective to the human experiencing it. But that these things are not to be punished, and connection is key. So I was always I always had that way of thinking anyway, and it's actually one of the reasons why I left, one of the many reasons why I left the NHS, was because I just didn't believe in the medical model anymore. I didn't believe in these things being medicated pharmaceutically. I wanted to go out there and explore, different ways of being with the client who often were seen as below, the doctor or the nurse or whatever. There was huge stereotyping and all that stuff. So I've kind of been blazing my own trail for the last 20 years in my own business and doing this work privately. But the principles kind of gave me a deeper understanding of the nature of that solution, you know,
Mhm,
that all of them are just looking for peace of mind.
mhm,
And they don't realize that it's within them, because we live in a conditioned world that says something outside of you can make you feel better.
mhm,
So where I might have gone into with clients, the pain, or because I've done all of it, psychotherapy, CBT, all the things. I've trained in all the things, and now what I see about that is, like, I was re-traumatizing myself when I was being therapized, and I was re-traumatizing others. So that's different. But I think I've always known on some level that it was not for me. I was my biggest critic, but for everyone else, I could see that it was a solution. But for me, I couldn't. I was being too judgmental on myself.
mhm. It's so interesting what you say about re-traumatizing. So by going into the past, that's what you mean, that
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I don't know how many, therapists I had over the years, many, one of whom said I was fucked,
Mm,
and, wanted me to go into the relive it. And of course, every time I'd come out of that session, I would be utterly exhausted and bereft, and I'd go and smoke and drink. So,
mhm.
um, and of course, I was doing that innocently to the people that were in my care with the NHS, and then, as a private counsellor. But with the three principles, I can see that is literally bringing it up in the moment again, and asking someone to relive it in the present moment, which that's not helpful. It's just not helpful to anyone. I can't remember what you asked now.
We were just touching on re-traumatizing and going
Oh,
into the
right. Yes,
past.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important for people to make a connection between their nervous system responses as children and then their behaviors that come up, whatever the behavior is. It doesn't matter to me, the thing. And I've done basically all of them. Because that's not what it is. It's about people going into chronic state of activation, nervous state, and then story gets created. So if we think about the principles as like, we're feeling our thinking, well, the nervous system was built in utero. So actually, sometimes that response could have been from when we were in our mum's womb, which means that, the thoughts aren't necessarily conscious thoughts. So sometimes we have to kind of root around and help people join the dots, but not in a re-traumatizing way, in a way that has them understand their nervous system, how it can get activated, and how they've innocently been trying to get them out of, get themselves out of that. But then they have all this judgment and conditioning and who am I in the world? And, so it's complex, isn't it? But I do it in a very gentle, careful way that has the person not get re-traumatized, because that is like, I wouldn't want to do that to anyone anymore.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned the freeze state a couple of times, and I'm guessing that has to do with the nervous system as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and tell us a little bit more about that and about if someone is in that state, coming out of it.
Well, the freeze state, so if you think about the nervous system as being part of your autonomic nervous system, so everything's, all the things that are going on in your body, which your body's very wise and very brilliant. And, if anyone needs to look at their health, they only have to go inside, and my food is being digested, and, my heart is beating, and there's blood going around in my veins. But the autonomic nervous system is, you'll have heard of have you heard of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic?
Yeah, probably a million years ago in like grade 9.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's kind of moved on from when we learned about it in biology, and they're talking about like this, there's 3 states. There's a social nervous system. So like that's you and I connecting now, giving each other eye contact, facial expressions, the whole thing. And then there's the commonly known fight or flight, which we're going then into the sympathetic nervous system. And then the third one is freeze, shut down. So it's like, a deer caught in headlights, for example, and they just freeze. So these are kind of evolutionary survival responses for every human. And so it's really hot here and I'm sweating, probably look a bit grim, but hopefully you welcome me anyway. So if, say, when you're a baby or you're, very small, and the social nervous system, you're not getting attuned to, you're not getting your needs met. As a child, you'll go down to the next one, which is fight and flight. Now, if that doesn't work, most children or small children can't fight and they can't run away. So then their system, if they're in a space that they perceive to be unsafe in some way, they will shut down. Now, over many years, if you've been in shutdown and then in flight or fright and then shut down, you're going to be in this state of constant either anxiety or confusion, disorientation, apathy, tiredness. And when people don't understand that, they think there's something wrong with them. And so then they drink and then they smoke and then they take drugs and then they might go gambling to feel something, to get them out of the shutdown and the freeze. And if people could just understand that even that, because what we point to in the principles, right, is it's universal. Like what's doing the heavy lifting? Thoughts, mind, consciousness. the body is also universal and very wise, and the body holds the score, literally. So something that happened to me at 4 is still being held in my body. Now, if I haven't completed that stress cycle, like animals shake it out, it's stuck. It's stuck in my body. And people don't know that, and they go from freeze to flight or fright to freeze. And so I can tell in people's language where they are in their nervous system. If people come to me with anxiety, it's because they've been in chronic activation for many, many, many years. They've become hypervigilant. There's all of those things that happen to. So if you think about, me and you are here, and there's a lion coming for us, we are going to be hypervigilant, and we're going to try and run away. So then people turn it inwards, because if I need to know when my body is in space and time to be running away, and that's not actually happening, it's coming from my thinking, I'm going to go inwards and think my body's shit. What am I going to do about my body? I hate my body. So there's loads of signs that I can see that someone's been in chronic activation. But I talk about, obviously, the principles, and I go a layer deeper with the body, with people, just to give them an understanding of that universality as well, because these nervous systems are 500 million years old. Like, they all work the same, but with that, when we lack understanding of our brilliance, we think there's something wrong with us, and there just isn't. Just a misunderstanding of a body and a mind, which are just working beautifully.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And yeah, that so much. I keep with my guests, we circle around to the wisdom of the body. Tanya Alfersi works with people with menopause, and I
know Tanya.
and I had Stephanie Wood on recently, and she was doing kind of a nervous system reset program after the trauma of the pandemic that we've all been through. So yeah, I love hearing that. That's great. We're just about running out of time, so I wanted to touch on your podcast and what you offer to people. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
My podcast is called Courage, Dear Heart, and I have guests on there, like I've had Tanya on, and Michael Neal, and different people, and sometimes I'll do solo episodes. But it started when I first kind of started this life coaching business, and the name came to me, and because I really believe most people don't know how much courage they've got. And there's so many wonderful people out there with courageous stories, and they will kind of, shut it down or poo-poo it away. But I just, that's what I kind of work with people on, is their courage, their heart, their brilliance, their uniqueness. I have a Facebook group as well, like a ladies only Facebook group, although I do work with some men, but my work would appear femme-centric. My website's very female driven. But yeah, I have a wonderful free community on Facebook where I do lives like this, and I do my podcast live in that group, and then I have a circle membership that's again female only, and we do lots of different things in there. And because of my experience, there's yoga videos in there, there's fitness videos in there, there's recipes, there's hormonal health, and then I'll do group coaching and a theme of the month. So that's kind of how I work with people, spreading myself as much as I can to share this message as many places as I can.
And one of the things I love about your podcast is that sometimes you'll broadcast a live coaching session, or record it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, no, they're live in my free group.
Right.
All of my stuff is usually live in my free group, and then I either upload it. Yeah, I usually upload it. And so I'll ask the ladies in the group, anyone up for free coaching, if you don't mind it being filmed live.
Yes.
They are brilliant. They're my favorite thing to do, actually, because people in my experience on those live coaching, people genuinely hear something. And I don't know if it's because it's live that they're a bit more quiet within, or I don't know what it is, but they really do hear something, and then it gives people an opportunity to kind of relate, and then other people hear things. And yeah, thank you. I'd forgotten about that. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, they're really powerful, I find. And there's something about, of course, being coached that is so powerful. But I totally agree that even hearing somebody else be coached, it puts me anyway in a really nice space of, openness to insight. Yeah, I love those ones. They're great.
Thank you. And I love the group coaching as well for that very reason.
hmm
And my circle group has its own like secret circle podcast, and I get that feedback a lot as well from them, that they heard something in so and so being coached. And that's the wonderful thing about hearing other people being coached, because you're out of your own story.
Yes, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. Absolutely. So where can we find all this juicy stuff?
Well, I have a website. I am Charli Wall, and then on Facebook I'm Charli Wall, and it's Charlie with an I. um And so on my website, you'll find my group. There's links to my free group. There's links to my YouTube, my podcast, my retreats. It's kind of all on my website. But if you want to add me on Facebook, it's Charli Wall, and I'm really public. I have a public profile, so you can pretty much see everything and find my groups from there as well.
Great. Okay. Well, I will, as ever, put links in the show notes so people can find that. Thank you so much for being with me here today, Charlie. I really appreciate it.
It's been really, really lovely, Alexandra. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.